I stopped holding it together. I used to believe that love meant staying, that commitment meant enduring whatever came, no matter how heavy it became. For a long time, I told myself that if I just tried harder, worked more hours, slept less, carried more weight, things would eventually even out, that we would find our way back to each other. We have two young children, still small enough to reach for my hand without thinking, still young enough to believe that home is wherever their mother is. For the past year, I have been the only one holding that home together. I took extra shifts whenever they were offered. I let my credit cards fill up with expenses I couldn't postpone: groceries, medical bills, shoes the kids outgrew in weeks. I gave up our apartment because it became impossible to keep paying for a life that only one person was sustaining. When my parents offered to help with childcare, it felt like a lifeline, not an easy one, but a necessary one. It meant I could finally afford a small place again. It meant stability. But it also meant making a decision I had been avoiding. I told my husband that if he couldn't work, if he couldn't contribute in any way, he couldn't move with us. At first, I told myself I was being practical, rational, fair. But the truth was harder than that, because it wasn't just about money, it was about safety. What most people didn't know, what I hadn't even fully admitted to myself, was that his unemployment wasn't just bad luck or a difficult job market. It was the surface of something much darker. It started with an injury, a legitimate one: surgery, recovery, prescriptions, and then silence, secrets, the slow shift from medication to something else, something dangerous. By the time I understood what was happening, our lives were already fractured. He wasn't allowed to be alone with the kids anymore, not because he didn't love them, but because love isn't enough when addiction is involved, because unpredictability is a risk I couldn't justify. I asked myself every night how this had become our reality. This was the man who once cried in a hospital room, holding our newborns like they were fragile miracles. The man who talked about teaching them how to ride bikes, how to tie their shoes, how to be kind. That version of him felt impossibly far away. There were attempts to fix things: rehab programs, therapy, promises that sounded real when spoken softly. Each time I let myself hope. Each time I was disappointed. Then came the arrests, the accidents, the phone calls that made my stomach drop before I even answered. I reached a point where loving him meant putting everyone else at risk. That was the moment something inside me shifted. I realized that protecting him was no longer the same as protecting my children. So when I told him he couldn't move with us, it wasn't anger speaking, it was exhaustion, it was clarity. I still love the man he used to be. I probably always will. But love alone cannot rebuild a life that keeps collapsing under the same weight. I decided to file for divorce after his sentencing, not because I stopped caring, but because I finally started caring about the right things. Some people call it giving up. I call it choosing stability. For my children, for myself, and for the quiet understanding that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let go of the life you thought you were going to have. This story isn't about anger. It's about what happens when you stop defending yourself to people who never believed you and choose to survive quietly. I left the night no one was watching. I learned early that in my family, someone always had to be wrong, and that someone was me. It didn't matter what actually happened. If something went missing, it was assumed I took it. If someone was late, it must have been because I distracted them. If my younger siblings argued, I was told I should have stopped it, even when I wasn't home, especially when I wasn't home. My parents used to say I was strong enough to handle it, that I was mature, that I understood responsibility. What they really meant was that I was convenient. My younger siblings were treated like glass, handled carefully, protected from consequences. If they forgot homework, it was the teacher's fault. If they broke something, it was an accident. If they failed, someone else had pushed them too hard. But when I failed, it was a flaw. When I was tired, I was lazy. When I was upset, I was dramatic. When I defended myself, I was disrespectful. So I stopped defending myself. I did what I was told. I cleaned what needed cleaning. I showed up early. I stayed quiet. I learned that silence made things pass faster. By 16, I paid for my own phone. By 17, I worked evenings and weekends, not because I wanted extra money, but because work was easier than home. At work, expectations were clear. Effort had rules. Mistakes were explained. At home, effort didn't matter. I could do everything right and still be wrong. The breaking point came over something small, a broken lamp. I wasn't even in the house when it happened. I was at work. My time card proved it. But when I walked in, my parents were already angry. They didn't ask, they didn't check. They told me I needed to take accountability. That was the moment I understood something clearly. This was never about truth. It was about roles, and my role was already written. So I stopped trying to rewrite it. I started planning instead. Quietly. I gathered documents one at a time, saved money in an account they didn't know about, applied to colleges without telling anyone. No one noticed. They never noticed when I needed help. Why would they notice when I prepared to leave? On my 18th birthday, there was no party, no celebration, just expectations. I waited for the house to be asleep, packed what I needed, left what I didn't. I didn't leave a long letter. There was nothing left to explain. I wasn't running away. I was stepping out of a story that never let me speak. I stayed with a relative at first, then moved into student housing. Life didn't magically become easy, but for the first time, my mistakes were mine. My successes were mine. No one blamed me for things I didn't do. Months later, I heard through family that my parents were confused, that they didn't understand why I left. They said I was ungrateful. I didn't argue. I didn't correct the story. I finally understood something important. You don't have to convince people who benefit from misunderstanding you. You just have to leave and build a life where blame isn't the price of belonging. Leaving was only the beginning. Because no one tells you what happens next after you cut off your own family. That part comes in the next story. I cut contact with my mother last Sunday. I thought I would cry. I thought I would feel guilty. I thought I would fall apart, but I didn't. I felt light, like something heavy had finally been lifted from my shoulders. That feeling scared me at first, because you're not supposed to feel relief after cutting off your own parent. I'm 22, and this is new territory for me. I don't know who in my family knows yet. I'm not calling anyone. I'm not explaining myself. If they ask, I'll tell them we're not speaking. That's it. My brother knew before I did it. We've always had a distant relationship. When I told him my plan, he said it wasn't a big deal. He said I was about to ruin everything. I did it anyway. I wrote her a letter. I was clear. I asked her not to involve him. The first thing she did was blame him. She called him, asked if he knew about the letter. He told her, "That's between you and her. I don't know anything." Her response said everything. She told him to get out, told him he wasn't welcome, swore at him, cut him down the same way she always cut me down. And in that moment, I knew I had made the right choice. Even though I was angry at my brother, I was relieved he got out safely, that he wasn't hurt. I wasn't alone. My boyfriend of 4 years stayed with me, held me when the anger wore off. My friends stood beside me too, the same friends who called her behavior out years ago when I thought it was normal. The name-calling, the insults disguised as jokes, being made to feel small in my own home. I thought that was just how family worked. Now I know better. This is still new. I'm still learning who I am without constantly bracing myself. If you've been here before, if you've survived this stage of leaving, I'd like to know what comes next. But for now, I'm standing my ground, and for the first time in a long while, I'm breathing freely.